Hello and welcome to Not to Get Political, the podcast where we delve into the world of politics and hope to remain unscathed. Today we are discussing the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crime in the UK and the potential causes behind it. On Sunday night, two men, one in their 20s, one in their 30s, were attacked outside the Two Brewers in Clapham High Street on Sunday night. The Metropolitan Police released a statement saying that it was a homophobic hate crime. To discuss this with me, I'm joined by Ben Smoke, commissioning editor of the Huck Magazine. Ben, thank you so much for coming on. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
So, where to start, really? I guess this week with the attack in Clapham, I guess we can start there. What were your thoughts on it?
I think it's one of those things where you sort of live in a bubble. You know, like I live in North London, kind of in and around Dalston more than I would like to admit. In and out of the bars, and I've got lots of friends that work in nightlife and are out and about, and you sort of get into this very safe little cushioned bubble, and it very much comes crashing down very quickly when something like this happens. And you sort of think, well, what if that was me and my partner stood outside of one of the bars that we are often in any part of London. And I think, I'm really reticent to make it kind of about myself specifically and my emotional reaction to it, which is obviously jarring. I was kind of thinking about our last Friday night, me and my boyfriend were out, and I got upset about something. I can't remember. I think I'd had too many beers and got a bit teary. And we were in the street, and he was hugging me and making sure I was all right, and he kissed my neck. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, oh shit, we're really exposed here. Even though I was deep, whatever I was upset about, I can't remember, so it clearly wasn't that important. But at the time, I was not having a good time. But the thought in my head was, oh shit, who else is around? And that is, I think, the reality, the bubbling away underneath it. I talk about living in these very comfortable little bubbles, but there is this sort of this undercurrent, this vein that runs through every single queer person. I should also say, I'm a white gay man that lives in North London. I'm not I'm not one of the communities and the intersections of those communities that are at the sharpest edges of it. And so, those people, trans communities particularly, are very much in the firing line at the moment. And it's kind of hard to articulate it. The sort of increasing and more toxic and terrifying escalation.
Well, we'll look at that. So trans people are the most targeted group in the LGBTQ community. Hate crimes towards them are up 56% from last year. And as with all hate crime stats, it's not an accurate picture because most people don't report them. What do you think is causing that?
So I think, it's interesting. In terms of hate crimes, in the 5 years from Vice did a really good investigation on this last year I think it was about this time last year. So in the 5 years to that point, homophobic or hate crimes based on someone's sexuality had doubled, and transphobic hate crimes had tripled. In 2016-17, it was 10,003 hate crimes based on sexual orientation reported across the country. In 2022, it was 26,200 and something I wrote down.
So that's a real big jump.
Huge. And so, I think we kind of need to look at what happened in that time, in those last 5 years. And I think the reality is, to a certain extent, it's Brexit. Now, Brexit isn't homophobic in of itself. People that voted for Brexit aren't homophobic. But what was Brexit? Brexit was an expression of frustration for a lot of people, and it was weaponized, particularly by the right wing, particularly by far right contingent of the Conservative Party, and then people like Nigel Farage, etc. To create this sort of you've had to not speak, you've not been able to say
you can't say what you really think,
exactly, but now you can. Now you're able to. Now you're able to have these. And so I think the fact, in the aftermath of Brexit, hate crimes spiked across every
single... Well, I think it definitely spiked after, particularly towards immigrants and people of colour. In the wake of the Brexit vote, I remember it shot up massively. It went back down, but that's the case with a lot of these events, like when Lee Rigby was murdered. Islamophobic hate crime went up. Whenever there's a terror attack in London or elsewhere, if there's the Muslim community, the hate crime rates go up. When Boris Johnson described Muslim women as looking like bank robbers and letterboxes, Tell Mama said it went up by 365%. So you're right in what you're saying, 100%.
Yeah, and I think when we're talking about hate crimes and we're talking about Brexit and the unleashing of kind of like far right, like anti-minority sentiment, I think that's also come. So there's this perfect storm of a Conservative Party that actually have no ideas and have no solutions to the reality and the problems, the huge problems that are facing communities across this country. This government has been in power for 13 years under different prime ministers, but it's been the Conservative Party in power. And what have we seen? We have seen a catastrophic decline in the standard of living. We have seen collapse of wages. We have seen people getting poorer, people dying, people on the street, an explosion of things like food banks. We have seen for the first time warm banks in the fifth richest economy in the world. People have to go to spaces in order to not freeze to death. We saw people freeze to death in their homes last year. The reality is the Conservatives don't have any solutions to this. They know they don't have any solutions to this. The reason, in part, that they won in 2019 with such a seismic win was because of the weaponization of Brexit, not because they offered any kind of solution, not because they offered any kind of hope, but because they made it a single issue campaign. Yeah. And that is essentially what they are trying to continue to do now. So when you see things like Kemi Badenoch, who is the Minister for Women and Equalities, coming out and saying, we're going to crack down on gender-neutral toilets.
Yeah, that was ridiculous.
And it's just like, are you all right? Are you actually okay? Because across the country, there are children starving every single day. Across the country, there are kids going to school without materials, without the proper clothes. There are people on the streets. There is an explosion of homelessness. There are people being turfed out. And what you're talking about is where someone shits. But fundamentally, you are talking about that. And that's because they don't have any solutions to it. They have nothing. And so they're trying to, and it's very much the same as what we're seeing with the channel and the boats. We're going to stop the boats. They could do it tomorrow. They could literally do it tomorrow. If they turned around and said, okay, we're gonna open safe routes, suddenly these smugglers that they say hold all of this power have absolutely no power, because people won't need to put themselves, their families and their loved ones at risk to cross the single busiest shipping lane in the world in a dinghy because there is a route out of it. They don't care. They don't have the solutions and they don't care for the solutions. All they want to do is to retain power and use wedge issues. And whoever gets hurt because of that, whoever gets in the way, they don't give a shit. As long as they're still getting their red boxes and their, cabinet cars, they literally don't care.
Well, as you said, you brought up making it single issue. I mean, Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, Lee Anderson, said that the only way the Conservatives would win the next election is by focusing on cultural issues and on trans rights. You can already see it now. The next election will just be Tory attack videos on Labour, basically of those politicians being asked what is a woman, and all of that stuff. And it's as you said, people are dying, children are starving.
Yeah.
There are bigger issues that are going on. What role are politicians playing in the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes?
I think it's this sinister role. It's very nudge, nudge, wink, wink, isn't it? What we saw in the 80s was this, we had the decriminalisation of homosexuality in 1967 off the back of the Wolfenden Commission in the 50s. And in the aftermath of that, you then sort of had a bit of backlash to it. And you then had this sort of narrative around groomers and, particularly gay men being unsafe to be around. And then you had the AIDS epidemic and the way in which people were spoken about, and people who were dying horrendous deaths were being spoken about and weaponized by an establishment. And so we're seeing a lot of that repeated now. So they know it works because we had the implementation of Section 28, which obviously wasn't repealed until 2003, and that was partly because of the danger posed to children being exposed to the idea that it was all right to be gay, or it was all right to be a lesbian or bisexual or trans. And we're having the exact same thing now. It's this idea that children being exposed to any kind of notion that it is fine to be who you are. It's fine to love who you love. It's fine to be attracted to who you are, is inherently dangerous unless it's cis heterosexual, in which case it's, it's really cute that they've got like little boyfriends. And it's just like that. Do you not see how that's the same thing?
This is what's interesting, because this is the thing I've heard. It's like, it's being shoved down kids' throats. I think people inherently see LGBTQ relationships as being very sexual, whereas for straight relationships it's not seen the same way. I think of I grew up with the Disney Channel, and I remember like seeing a lot of the shows there. There was always like a romantic theme going on there with someone who was maybe like 14, 15, like, oh, I want to get a girlfriend. Is he going to take me to the dance? Like that sort of that thing there. And like you kind of think, well, they're saying this as being that the gay people are doing this, right? And it's like, but it's been like these heteronormative values have been like imposed on us from like such a young age. And like, well, it hasn't. I mean, I'm straight. That's not saying that's the reason that I'm straight, but it's like, do they not see it? Do they not see the hypocrisy?
It's completely preposterous. It's a complete misnomer that the idea that saying to kids or in any way portraying any kind of like queer attraction, and we're not sitting here saying, like, let's put anal on the Disney Channel. Like no one is arguing for that, much the same way as we're not saying that we should see heterosexual people having their fun missionary sex or whatever it is that you guys get up to. Like, really happy for you. Godspeed. And like, this is the thing, I think, like, no one is arguing for that. And politicians are incredibly complicit in sort of nudging people towards this like notion that it's inherently corruptive. And you see it in the way that they talk about things like drag story time, right? And so like lots of my friends are drag queens. They, some of them I've seen do fucking disgusting things on stage, like absolutely rancid and deranged and funny in a bar at midnight in Vauxhall. Fine. Those are not the acts that they are going to be doing in front of children, because that is what it is to be an entertainer. What you never see, what's really interesting about this is that you have these like, oh, this person has once like, used a fucking can of baked beans as a dildo or whatever it is.
That's what I want to know.
I can't go back there. I'm getting Nam flashbacks. No, but like it's always this sort of like, they pick the absolute most deranged thing that someone may or may not have done as an act, and like, this person is in front of children. It's, okay, right. Are you aware of the concept of acting and entertaining in much the same way as actors will be in a film which is an 18 where they are doing like mental shit, and then they will be in a children's film that is the same person. They are able to do different things for different audiences. That is the point. It is not inherently corruptive that a man that was on screen, in, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like the most deranged.
Well, think of some of the stuff like, say someone like Will Smith, for example. I'm just using him as an actor. You think some of the films that he's been in, like some really like horrific films in like the violence I'm thinking like maybe like Bad Boys to a certain extent. That's the only film I can think off the top of my head. And then you think like he's been stuff like Aladdin, for example, like Men in Black, which is like really like light-hearted. And it's like, that's the same actor just doing different roles. As you said, it's acting. Yeah. Right. It's, that's their job. Yeah. That is literally their job. Same with drag queens as well.
Yeah. And it's just this thing. It's like, it's hypersexualized. Like they're showing flesh. And it's like Will Smith is a perfect example of that, because as the genie in Aladdin, my man's got his chest out. Yeah. Like, he's topless. Like, how many characters in Disney animations are showing flesh? It's like, it's not inherently corruptive to see someone's leg. We are not Victorian. No. Like, children understand that they also have legs. They see their parents having legs. Everyone has a fucking leg. everyone needs to chill the fuck out.
Well, this is what's interesting because, like, the people always putting up, oh, look, they're interacting with the kids, they're dancing with them. I spent a lot of time in Greece growing up, and I always remember, like, you'd have the bars, you'd have the girls that were commissioned there to, like, dance, and they would dance with the children as well. And I don't ever remember anyone ever, like, tutting and just being like, oh, they're sexualizing children, they're encouraging them to do, like, slut drops and stuff like that. It's like, no, it's just a woman dancing with a young girl. What is wrong about that? And it's so frustrating. I think especially because, like, when you see it in real time and the effects that it's having, and we'll get on to the media next and the role that they're playing. But yeah, I mean, it just must be so tiring.
I think it's just frustrating because you sort of see the like rank hypocrisy of it all, and you see these people stoking the fires for their own political gain, and you know exactly what they're doing. Fundamentally, these people don't really give a shit because it doesn't matter.
It's a grift.
It completely. And it's like much the same way as Keir Starmer has rolled back on, you know, he sort of came out and was like, yeah, I'm pro-trans rights. And now all of a sudden he's like decided that he's not, and he's apologizing to Rosie Duffield and all of this stuff. And it's like, there is a reason for this. Like, I genuinely do not think that Keir Starmer in of himself is transphobic. I like have had lots of conversations with people that are like in the Labour Party that, you know, have contact with him, who have spoken to him about these issues. Like, I don't think he is. What I think he is a grifter. I think he is somebody that like believes that he is destined to, I was going to say rule, but it's more like middle manage, isn't it? Yeah. Fundamentally, like that's.
He's always got the vibe. I think because I voted for him to be Labour leader, and I think I haven't. Would I say I regret voting for him? Well, I didn't really know enough about the other candidates, and he was like, well, he seemed like the best guy to lead us forward. It's now reached the point where it's like with Chelsea last season, where they're like 12th, they spend like shit tons of money, and it's just like, yeah, fuck it, bring in Lampard. Like, end of the season, we'll figure it out. Like, that's kind of the point where it feels like they've reached. And it's like, he probably will become our next Prime Minister. Yeah. But I don't feel like anything will change anytime soon.
No, and I think this is the thing, is you can see, you know, he was sort of like, there's pictures of him at Pride in years gone by, and he wasn't there this year.
I'm not surprised though.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, the reason for that is because he has seen that his support of LGBTQ communities and people is going to hold him back and is going to be weaponized. You're right. Like, the Tories are going to. The Tories, for some reason, think that Lee Anderson has in any way got anything like important or interesting or like it's like some kind of like profit.
You know, when you give like a child keys to play with, something to distract them, that's just kind of how it feels. And they're like, they might do something funny in a bit. Yeah, like, it's just like, fuck it, let them do it.
I mean, it's just, I mean, that is, I can't remember who tweeted. I saw someone tweet the other day where it's like, like quote tweeting the announcement from around single sex toilets. And it was like, essentially the Tory party are just sort of like jangling keys in front of old people to like distract them and be like, vote for this. And it's just like, it's just ludicrous and ridiculous. And what we're seeing is these sort of power plays and these wedge issues now come very much to the fore. And, you know, as we kind of started off speaking, like, you know, the rise in homophobic and transphobic hate crime, you just look at like the reaction to this week. So Cheryl Hole, who I've known for ages, like she's like lovely, like very funny, incredibly talented. And I've never, like, there are some elements of drag, old school drag, that I've been to and I've seen, and they've sort of like relied really heavily on like, you know, lesbian jokes and tropes like that. Yeah. That's never ever been like the majority of the drag that I know, the majority of the like artists that I know, never ever engage with that, because it's just like, it's not fucking funny. And B, it is lazy, and it's also, there are way funnier and like better and more entertaining things to do, and Charlotte is very much in that camp. And this like backlash against her being on, I was gonna say Mastermind, no harm to her, no harm to her, it wasn't fucking Mastermind. God love her, MasterChef. And like, I think it was literally this morning, the Telegraph printed a thing. We are less than a week since 2 gay men got stabbed outside of a London gay bar, saying "knives out" for Cheryl Hole. Well, and it's like,
well, this is the thing I want to bring when we get into the conversation about the media. But the Telegraph, I remember the day that stabbing was announced that it happened. They had published an article saying that Pride cost British taxpayers £500,000, and it's like, how much did the coronation cost?
Yeah, right.
And it's I look at this stuff, and it's like, you think of how profitable these events are, how many people visit, and also like, do gay people not pay tax?
Yeah,
like
right.
Famously, no gay is British or pays tax in this country. It's
famously, no gay person has ever bought anything.
HMRC need to look into some of these finances. But yeah, we'll look at that. What role does the media play in the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes?
I mean, we've seen it. I mean, literally, the media is the driving force behind this. What we have seen in the last sort of like 5, 6, 7 years is this sort of drive, this transphobic drive, which is then equated to, like, dripped into political rhetoric, because people are like, oh wait, no, this is something that we can utilize and weaponize. But it was really recently, I think it was like a couple of weeks ago, it was the 20th anniversary of the Big Brother series, where trans contestant Nadia won with a stonking majority of the public vote. And can you imagine that running now? Like, the shitstorm, the think pieces, the people that would be out there being like, she's stealing a woman's place and it's just like utterly ludicrous.
It feels so forced as well, like a lot of it. It's like, does anyone actually care? Like, as you said, wasn't it, there was the character on Coronation.
Hayley.
Yeah, Hayley. Yeah. She was trans. And like, nobody gave a shit.
No.
And you think of so many roles where there has been like a trans character, nobody gives a monkeys. It's only because now someone like says, oh yeah, that person was trans. It's like, yeah, okay, like, it just do not give a monkeys, mate.
And also, it's just like the number of trans people in this country is so minuscule.
It's 224,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's like 0.5% of the population.
I think that's like, if I'm not mistaken, I think that's about the size of Swansea.
I don't
like
know.
It's like, no harm to Swansea.
Yeah.
I don't like it, but no harm to it. And we've got beef.
Us here at Not to Get Political do not condone any anti-Swansea slander, except when you beat Liverpool. Yeah.
But that is in terms of the population across the entire country, inconsequential. If you then look at the number of articles written, if you look at the number of people, the amount of airtime that has been dedicated to it. And now, we are now in this position where, I think it was like a couple of days ago, again, I think it was in the Telegraph.
There's a running theme here. There is a...
Don't get me started, we'll never get out of it. The Telegraph reported that the chess body...
This was the Times, I think, but a lot of papers have reported the same story. Yeah,
the International Chess Body is banning trans women from competing in women's chess tournaments because they have an unfair advantage. You're like, okay, should we just unpick that for a second? Yeah. So if you take aside all of the nonsense around like the physical domination of men and like men being inherently better at sports, which all of the rest of it, like the swimming and the cycling, is prefaced on, which is nonsense. Like, the women that are competing now, like, would wipe the fucking floor with me.
Yeah.
Most women would wipe the fucking floor with me on most sports. Maybe not like. No, literally, it's nothing. I've got nothing. I was thinking like maybe not darts, and I was like, I can't play darts.
I love me some darts. Once I figured out how the scoring worked, I was great at it.
I've never played it. I don't know why. But so if you take aside that and just sort of like take it, think there is no physical element to chess. Yeah. It is potentially the most like sedentary sport that possibly exists. So what you're saying is that there is a fundamental difference between the brains of men and women, which is in of itself a misogynistic trope, a misogynistic and far-right talking point, which has been used in the subjugation of women for centuries, the subjugation of women which you say you are against, and the reason why you hate trans people and the reason why you don't want trans people in these spaces is because it subjugates women. However, you have to rely upon this very, very, very ancient trope in order to do that. It is completely ridiculous.
Well, this is what's interesting, because I've got the article here, and it says chess players online accused the FIDE, which is like the World Chess Organization, of introducing the regulations to distract from allegations of sexual violence in the sport exposed by female players in an open letter last week. And so it's like, you guys don't care about women. You're just trying to do this to deflect.
This is the thing, isn't it? It's like, how many kind of like warriors online, how many of the anti-trans, gender critical TERF movement online, how many of them spend their lives rallying and railing against trans people particularly trans women, although trans men also get it in the neck.
Well, with Costa and everything the other week.
Right? Like, how many of them do that? And they're like, it's women, we're doing it for women. Okay, can you, like, scroll through their feed. You will very rarely find anything else apart from tirades about trans people. Never the fact that 2 women a week in this country are killed by a current or former partner. Never anything about the devastating effects of austerity or the cost of living crisis on particularly women. Yeah. Never anything about the way in which the rent crisis in this country, the spiraling cost of housing, or the fact that benefits are now capped to such an extent which makes women have to stay in abusive relationships because there is no way out and there is no safety net left. Yeah. They literally have the street or a house with an abuser. Never anything about that, because it's not actually about women. It's grifting. It is simply like rallying against, and the media have poured fuel onto this and have allowed this to balloon. And now what you have is this, like, every single month you have a collection of far right freaks stood outside of a pub in South London, the Honor Oak, rallying against drag story time, which is, I mean, I know the queens that do it. They're like wonderful, lovely, articulate, beautiful people who, I mean, one of them is an author. Like, they are exactly the kind of people that you would want to be reading stories to your children. They're all stood outside of it. And these are also, I think, really important to add, the same freaks that go and stand outside of hotels that are housing vulnerable asylum-seeking people and migrants. They are the exact same far-right freaks. This is where it's ended. This is where we are at. They are now, I mean, they go and protest even when the event isn't on.
Well, it's actually funny because you mentioned that to me. It reminds me when Turning Point UK were there and they rocked up with a banner that said "Groom dogs, not kids." And there's a photo of Keith Lard below in this thing there. So it's like stupid. There's something I wanted to pull you up on. You used the term TERF. For those of you who are listening and not sure what it means trans exclusionary radical feminist. Do you think that language like that is helpful in the conversation regarding LGBTQ rights and trans rights in particular?
Well, I think a lot of people will define themselves as TERFs. A lot of the gender critical, which is why I kind of like listed all of the different ways in which they describe themselves. A lot of people will have like TERF and proud. A lot of people will say like TERF is a hate crime, or like you're being oppressive. It's clearly not oppressive. Like, to call someone a TERF, it's literally trans exclusionary radical feminist. Are you a radical feminist? Yes. Are you trying to exclude trans people? Yes. Like, call a spade a spade. That's literally what you're doing. It's literally who you are. The way in which these conversations end up becoming very quickly about the way in which people who are arguing and are throwing their lives behind the denigration of a population of people less than the second city in Wales, who are already materially oppressed, who have stonking rates of suicide, huge rates of homelessness, of precarity, who are forced into all of these things. These women and men who spend their lives fighting to see them eradicated will spend so much time trying to make themselves into the victim and be like, well, actually, I was called a dinosaur. Don't fucking act like one then. You cannot expect people who are being attacked from every single angle. And the fact is, I think, like, some of these people who are on this crusade and who do spend all of their lives trying to kind of eradicate trans people from public and private life, some of these people who do spend their entire lives and careers trying to eradicate trans people from public and private life are so kind of like pilled by it, are so completely blinkered that they have completely lost sight of who it is that they're lining themselves up with. And it is the far right. It is the Conservative Party. It is these elements, it is the like right-wing elements of the media, all of whom are attacking women, all of who are, are putting in policies, are advocating for policies that will make the lives of women, of queer people, of people in general, working class people, people of colour in this country, demonstrably worse. And they see themselves as, they end up being allied with them, and sometimes actively so, because they have become so blinkered and obsessed with this tiny portion of society. And it kind of like boggles the mind, and I think that's where we end up getting to this sort of like turf is a slur thing.
You mentioned just now policies, anti-trans policies that would affect a load of groups that you listed: people of color, all women, working class people. What kind of policies would those be?
Well, I just think, for example, this sort of push. If we go to the most recent one, this push to stop gender-neutral toilets. This comes from years of policing and who can be in those spaces. And the reason why, the way in which that kind of comes about is like, oh, it's a danger. But people just want to piss, mate. Like, that's simply what needs to happen here. Like, people are just going in, doing their businesses and getting out. It's not fucking dangerous. If you think that having a symbol of a gender on a door is going to stop someone walking in somewhere and assaulting somebody, then I have a bridge to sell you, frankly, because it is preposterous. Like, that policy comes from all of this policing, and what ends up happening is lots of, for example, my butch lesbian friends who don't present particularly like feminine, who maybe have more of an androgynous look, as there is a very long tradition within butch communities of having an androgynous look, which isn't the same as being non-binary. It is very much that is their feminine their presentation of their femininity. They end up getting harassed in toilets. They end up getting chased out. They end up getting shouted at by people, and I've seen it time and time again. That is just like one very specific example of how these policies actually end up attacking the very people that they are there to allegedly protect.
Yeah. I think, I've always thought that, like, when you look at a lot of this stuff, because I think at the end of the day, like, say of like the blokes loo as well. I mean, my biggest concern when I go into the blokes loo is like the state of the loo. Because like, I've seen some, like, I would say this to people that are transitioning, and it's like transitioning to men, and I'm like, just to warn you, like, male shitters are disgusting. Yeah. Like, you will hate it. Yeah. Like, if you ever thought about maybe like detransitioning, that might have an impact on it. On the edge. You will take one look at your own and you just like,
absolutely
why is there shit in there?
Honestly, yeah, the state of them. But I think it's sort of, it speaks to this, like, we could just go back to the culture that's been created by the media and by politicians. It speaks to this like complete detachment from reality. It's like people just want to go in, do their business and leave. It's like this idea of like changing rooms and spaces. It's like people just want to go, get changed, and then carry on and do whatever it is that they wanted to do. Like, why is it that this is such a huge issue, and why is it that like this is the hill that you're dying on?
It's like, I remember when I was where I was working a few months ago, and this woman that I worked with, she was very lovely. Like, she was really like calm, never really like kicked up a fuss. Like, she was very like easygoing, and the conversation about Sam Smith came up, and I've never seen such venom come out. It's like, oh, I don't believe they're they them. What's that? That doesn't exist. He's a man. And I was like, calm down. It's like, and this is the thing, as you said, like, it's this poison, and this like people feel so strongly on issues that like they really, a couple of years ago, they wouldn't have given a shit about. Yeah. And I wanted to bring this on to religion, because I feel like this is a big impact. It has a big impact on the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes. What role do you think religion plays in the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes?
I think it's like kind of hard to say. I mean, I think that it's very important to recognize like straight up that there are queer people that exist across religions. Yeah. And, I've got friends who are queer Muslims, I've got friends who are trans Christians. There are any denomination of people that you have, there will be an LGBTQ contingent within them. I'm not sure that it particularly like has an aggravating effect currently in a way that it has in a more extreme way than
well, I was thinking more along the lines of like conversion therapy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, conversion therapy is one of those things where people try and overcomplicate it and try and make it, it's religious freedom. It's not. It's not religious freedom. Like, it's not. Your freedom of religion does not like grant you the freedom to behave poorly, to tell people that they are not allowed, they should not be, and however they want to like wrap it up as like, we're counseling them. It's like, what you're doing is telling them that like who they are is wrong. Yeah. Don't do that. Like, that's not Right. I mean, I think that with conversion therapy, you know, obviously we had the government pledge to ban it, and then U-turn and say, well, actually, we're only going to ban sexuality. You can still get converted out of being trans. I mean, you can't, but like, we're still going to let people fuck people up and, you know, psychologically damage people on that. And then they sort of U-turned again, but now it's in the grass. I mean, I think it's sort of, it actually is one of the parts of the story that is the smallest in that it's not the driving force of the transphobia that we see today. Okay. It's not the driving force of the homophobia that we see today. It is, you know, there's a foundation of it. There's a puritanical foundation of it. And it has been, you know, that has been utilized for centuries to like denigrate and subjugate these communities. But I'm not sure that it necessarily has like a huge driving effect like right this second. My
next one, final two questions. First one is, what role do you think pornography plays in the rise of anti-LGBTQ hate crimes?
You see, this is interesting, isn't it? Because it's like sodomy was made illegal. So kind of sex between two men was made illegal on the basis that it was, you know, disgusting, it was immoral, it was, you know, against God's will, etc. Sex between two women was never made illegal because it wasn't seen as valid. It's, you know, and you sort of get this. It's quite funny whenever I kind of go out with my friends who are women who sleep with other women, and they'll sort of like come across, if we go to straight bars and they sort of come across like unwitting straight dudes who are like 4 pints in and are like, yeah, I'm gonna show my allyship now by asking really, really, really invasive questions about, so how do you do it then? Do you just sort of rub it? Like, what goes in? And it's like, oh, this is phenomenal. Please carry on, because then you always get to watch one of my friends just rip them a fucking new one. Yeah. But so I think like in that sense, it's quite funny then that, you know, pornography hypersexualizes lesbianism, and then when we see, you know, when I know there was the attack, I can't even remember when it is now, but it was a few years ago on the bus.
Yeah, on the top deck of the bus. Yeah.
And, you know, the sort of driving force of that was like kiss, you know, make out, like, you know, be sexual objects for us, for our gratification. Yeah. And then when people quite rightly are like, fuck off. Yeah. Then they get attacked. And it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the opposite, I think, is kind of true for like me and my boyfriend, is that like when we're on a bus or like we're in a public space, often the last thing we'll do is to like show any kind of like sexual or like physical contact with one another, because the risk of violence like increases because of that. So I think like, does it play a huge role? Like, I'm not sure. I think it plays a role in the like entitlement of people to like view people as objects. But again, that again is very much linked with like the deep and inherent misogyny within society that views women as objects for the gratification of men, whether that be sexual or otherwise, and that it just happens to be through the prism of queerness in that particular instance.
Okay, that's interesting. My final question is, how do we tackle this issue? How does everyone sort of come together and deal with anti-LGBTQ hate crime and the issues surrounding it?
Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? I wish I had the answer. I wish I had a simple answer. Yeah. And I don't think that there is one, which is annoying, because like for lots of other things, there's a really like the channel crossing, really simple answer, just open safe routes. You know, for homelessness, just house people. There are like hundreds of thousands of empty homes in this country. For anti-queer sentiment in this country, like there isn't a quick answer. And the thing is it's now we're kind of getting to a point where it's like history repeating itself again and again and again, and these toxic conversation points, these toxic bits of rhetoric that are now, I mean, like the 80s was fucking 40 years ago. Like that is a lot, it's older than I am. Like it's like this rhetoric is now entrenched. Like, how do we get out of it? What we need is for people in positions of power to act responsibly, firstly, to stop weaponizing communities, to stop weaponizing people's fears. You know, I understand, I don't necessarily agree with it. I understand how people get into this sort of like, oh, well, hold on a minute, but women's only spaces are supposed to be there to protect women, and now suddenly they're not. I mean, obviously, I like disagree with the like fundamental principle that trans women aren't women, because they are. But I get how, I can see the logic into it. The reality is that can be cut off at the beginning, nipped in the bud, if you don't have a load of people writing columns every week for like newspapers of every single political bent. I should say, this is not just a right-wing issue. You have commentators across the political spectrum that are like feeding this fire and very much like aggravating it.
How are people on the left doing it? Sorry.
Well, I mean, just look at there are columnists across left-wing publications like The Guardian, The Observer. There's a very, very like strong kind of like contingent within the radical left who are like transphobic and who believe that it's like an attack on women, who believe that it's an attack on the class of women. Like it really does permeate. And again, this is kind of one of those things where it's quite interesting to see people who have been so virulently anti-Tory, who have been so virulently anti-right-wing, standing up and repeating the same lines as the government on this issue. So it's like people taking responsibility and not utilizing it. And I think just sort of like pushing back on it at every single point. And, in terms of like physical, like how do we physically do it? Like going down to places like Honor Oak and, showing that there's, because when you look at any single poll, it completely goes against what.
Well, YouGov did that polling the other day that showed that actually Britons view LGBTQ people much more positively than LGBTQ people think that Britons view them. Yeah. And it goes against the entire consensus that we've seen in the media. Well, this is I was surprised by it.
Well, isn't it? Because it is a kind of like coterie of people that are very loud, but that do not represent. Like, most people don't care. Most people have got enough to get on with in their lives. They simply do not like. Why is it that politicians are on morning television or national radio being asked whether a woman can have a penis? Like, are you like? What a dereliction of duty by those journalists who have these people who are in positions of huge power, either now or potentially in the future, in the case of people like Keir Starmer, Rachel Reeves. What an absolute dereliction of duty to sit there when the country is on its knees and people are starving and hungry. That is the same thing. Starving, freezing, potentially losing their homes, haven't seen any wage increases, have seen a huge drop in their standard of living. To sit there and ask about a hypothetical person's genitals, get a fucking grip. Like, get a hold of yourself, because it just feeds into this idea that it completely doesn't represent what most people in Britain are like. So, being out on those demonstrations outside of Honor Oak and wherever it is that this kind of like anti-trans, anti-queer, anti-drag like sentiment like raises its head, showing people in power that they can't utilize, they can't win by dividing us, and showing that we are stronger, and they can try as much as they want. Like, we're not going anywhere, we're not going away. So you can make it easy or you can make it hard, essentially.
Yeah. Well, Ben, thank you so much for coming on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Before you go, is there anything that you'd like to promote?
Oh no, I don't have anything. I feel like I should make something up now. No, I guess read Huck, and
socials and stuff like that.
Yeah. It's at Huck Magazine, and check out some of the queer groups that are doing loads of really good stuff. There's London Trans Pride. There's Lesbians and Gays Support the Migrants. There's all of the groups that are organising around Honor Oak, And to all of you listening, thank you so much. We love your support, and we'll see you for the next episode. Bye.